The U.S. midterm elections cavalry arrived early in London. What do I mean by that? Well, the new British Prime Minister Liz Truss has laid out a terrific supply-side economic growth plan, which looks a lot like the basic thrust of Kevin McCarthy's Commitment to America plan. Let's start with Truss. She is slashing tax rates and deregulating energy. I just love it. That's the liberal business media. This is wonderful. The liberal business media, you know what I'm talking about, is now trashing her plan. That tells me Truss has it exactly right.
I'm Sarah Kendzior, the author of the bestsellers The View from Flyover Country and Hiding in Plain Sight, and of the book They Knew, How a Culture of Conspiracy Keeps America Complacent, out now.
I am Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, a film the Kremlin does not want you to see.
And this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast covering corruption in the United States and rising autocracy around the world.
And our opening clip was the Idiot Brigade at Fox News praising Liz Truss's economic plan, which is, as they say, Kevin McCarthy's economic plan. Remember, that economic plan tanked the British pound, caused chaos for the British economy, and ended Liz Truss's time in office. And now there's a new prime minister, Rishi Sunak, who also happens to be apparently the wealthiest member of parliament with a fortune twice that of the king. So that should be interesting. Our thoughts and prayers to the people of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to end well for them. I mean, I keep coming back to our old episodes from a few years ago where we said Brexit and Trump are the same crime, which of course they were. And then look at where we are now. All of the participants, all the perpetrators of that crime, both here and in the UK, remain unpunished, often remain within the halls of power. There was rumors about Boris Johnson coming back before this new PM was let in. There's widespread global instability. And then the folks who covered a lot of this the best in the UK, like Carol Cadwalladr, were harassed nearly to bankruptcy, hooked into horrible libel suits. I feel like there's a culture of refusal to tell the truth. People aren't stepping up to fill in where Carol left off. They aren't stepping up to fill in where a lot of exhausted Americans who've been studying corruption and transnational organized crime, where they've had to exit the arena for a variety of reasons. Sad state of affairs. So yeah, my sympathies to our British audience. We are all in this together, unfortunately weaker, I think, than we were 4 years ago, but refusing to bow down nonetheless.
As long as you guys keep Ben Wallace as Minister of Defense, we're all good. He's doing an amazing job in standing up to Russian fascism, being very supportive of Ukraine, getting Ukraine everything it needs to fight off a genocide. So yay, Ben Wallace. Please stay in there no matter what. Even if there's a general election and Labor comes to power, keep Ben Wallace. He's a good guy, a good chap, as you might say. Ukraine loves him. I'm a huge fan. So at least you got that right for now.
In the midst of the shambles, and what else do they call it? There's so many great little British insults I should really master in case I need to flee. Anyway, do we have anything else to say about the UK? Andrea and I are very exhausted, by the way. So this is a very special, ultra exhausted episode of Gaslit Nation.
Why are we so exhausted? Because there's a lot going on. There's a countdown to what may be our first of our last free and fair midterm elections, depending on how things
sure
go.
It's all that free and fair already, but go on.
Well, it's voting time on November 8th. A lot of states have early voting. And so far, the early vote has been off the charts, historic levels, far greater than the big blue wave in 2018. Of course, no one knows what that early vote means yet, because Republicans tend to vote on election day, young voters tend to vote on election day, but the early vote so far coming out of a lot of these key states is historic levels, way surpassing 2018's blue wave. So hopefully that's a good sign. Make sure that you know where you're voting. You could start by getting your own voting plan by going to gaslitnationpod.com and clicking on the homepage, the 2022 Survival Guide. Make sure you're voting. Make sure you're voting early if you can. Talk to your friends, family, neighbors around you about voting. This election is going to be so close because of the extreme polarization in our country. Both sides are energized, and that's why we're seeing just this historic wave of voters, Republican, Democrats. So every vote matters. A lot of these races you're going to see, they're going to be some nail biters. And that's why, as busy as we are, as stressed as we are, I've even lost my voice. I have some cold that my preschooler brought home. Despite that, we're going to keep pushing on. And so I hope you'll join me, because it's so urgent, to try to reach 1,000 voters by Election Day on November 8th. I know that's a big goal, 1,000 phone calls, and add into that 1,000 door knocks. So like 1,000 voters total. So far, I'm at 100. But if you aim for 1,000, you'll push yourself to do more than you even thought you're capable of. So shoot for the moon and reach the stars. That's what this is all about. And if you're doing the 1,000 voter challenge with me in Gaslit Nation, tweet at us at Gaslit Nation on Twitter for your chance to come on the show. Out of all the tweets we receive, we're going to select 5 people to come on the show and chat with us, as we do every year when there's a big election. And we'll be extremely grateful for all the work that you're doing, and it'll be a great chance for you to meet us. As part of our Get Out the Vote fun times, we have a big event this Friday, October 28th at 4 p.m. Eastern. We're doing a phone bank for John Fetterman, who's up against that doctor from The Simpsons, Dr. Oz.
Dr. Nick Riviera.
Yeah, thank you for that one, Oprah, for inventing that guy. So we're going to be doing a big old phone bank for John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, 4 p.m. And guess what? Everyone who shows up to this phone bank this Friday, October 28th at 4 p.m., your presence there at the end of the phone bank, we're going to select one winner to receive a signed copy of Sarah's new book, They Knew, and also a signed Mr. Jones poster made by a famous Polish graphic designer. That is amazing. I'm so excited about that. So we've got 3 events. So if you don't win the book and the poster at the John Fetterman phone bank on Friday, you have another chance to win on Sunday, October 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern, when we do a phone bank for Christy Smith, a Democrat running for a U.S. House seat in California against Mike Garcia. This is a rematch. Last time around, Christy Smith lost by only 333 votes. So Mike Garcia, who's as Trumpian as they come, he's vulnerable here. So we can make a difference. We could expand our majority in the U.S. Senate with our Fetterman phone calls on Friday, and then expand our majority in the U.S. House with our phone calls for Christy Smith on Sunday. At that phone bank on Sunday for Christy Smith, we're doing it with our friends at Swing Left. And a friend of Gaslit Nation, Olga Lotman, one of the world's most renowned Russian mafia experts, she's going to drop in to say hello. So if you're a big fan of Olga, as I am, you want to come to this. And again, you have a chance of winning a signed copy of Sarah's new book, They Knew, and a signed Mr. Jones poster just by showing up to the Gaslit Nation phone banking events, right? So if you show up to all 3 of them, that increases your chances of winning. And the final phone bank is going to be Monday, November 7th, 4 p.m. Eastern. It's a phone bank with Indivisible for U.S. Senate candidate Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, who's running against that Kremlin propaganda agent, Ron Johnson, and also for U.S. Rep. Lauren Underwood in Illinois. To RSVP to all these events, go to our website, gaslitnationpod.com, and click on the 2022 Survival Guide on our homepage. Remember, every vote counts, and every single phone call we make to help get out the vote together counts. So please join us.
Yeah, I just have some things to say about this. As you're talking, I keep thinking about a book that I read every October, and I've actually quoted it previously on the show in October, which is Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is about a evil carnival that arrives in the Midwest. The carnival is led by a man named Mr. Dark, he promises to grant everyone's desires while actually enslaving them and manipulating their perceptions of life and death. And that's what I basically feel like we are up against with our political system. And there are 2 protagonists of this book. There is William, who is more upbeat, more willing to think that the forces of darkness are not going to triumph. And then there's his buddy Jim Nightshade, and that's basically the dynamic I think that we have created on this show, where Will and Jim are good friends and they're very loyal to each other. But Jim is not quite tempted by the darkness, although that does happen in the book, but intrigued by the darkness and basically is quite wary of the whole situation. And that's where I'm feeling now. And honestly, like, I cannot wait for this election to be over, in part because I feel like I want people to have honest conversations about the structural threats that we are facing. You should absolutely go out and vote. And I do think people will vote. I think that the high early voting numbers are a good sign, because I think people are truly concerned. So my concern is not with the voter, it is with a system that will not protect the voter, which includes not protecting poll workers who are facing threats of violence, who are being spied on by armed vigilantes in parking lots. Like, this has been building for years. This was simmering in 2016. This boiled over in 2020. There's not punishment from the DOJ for the attack on the Capitol and the attempt to overturn a legitimate election. So, of course, they're trying it again. We're already seeing a number of GOP candidates saying that regardless of the results, they are not going to concede. And I think we should expect to see a lot of mini versions of January 6th. And, we had Ari Berman, an election specialist, on, and especially a specialist on voter suppression and how it works, on the show several times to warn people about the fact that Steve Bannon and other right-wing extremists are basically stocking the vote counting apparatus with insurrectionists, with hardcore Trump supporters, because, that is how they manipulate the system. They basically operate under twin maxims. The infamous statement from Roy Cohn of "don't tell me what the law is, tell me who the judge is." This is the method they use when they go to court to try to get whatever they want. Clarence Thomas is doing it right now on behalf of Trump. And then also, the old aphorism, it's not the votes that count, it's who counts the votes, allegedly attributed to Stalin. It's not quite clear whether that is his, but certainly in the Stalinist spirit. That's the spirit that the GOP have been in for a long time. And so there was a lot of time for the Democrats to prepare for this, to do all the things that they actually were pretty good about doing in 2020, to fight to secure voting by mail, for example, despite Louis DeJoy. Where are we now? Well, Louis DeJoy is still there. And yes, that is out of Biden's personal preference. He did get rid of 2 people on the USPS Board of Governors and replaced them with Republicans, with Mitch McConnell acolytes and hardcore Louis DeJoy supporters who are making it very difficult for folks to get their voting information in the mail and to vote by mail. We have an attack on voting rights that really accelerated in 2013 with the partial repeal of the VRA and caused a lot of new laws, the most alarming of which, as Ari Berman noted about a year and a half ago, are these laws in state legislatures that allow them, GOP extremist state legislatures, to simply overturn the vote. And so I'm very concerned about that, because I look at folks in Georgia, for example, where turnout has been very high, and they're organized and they're getting out. They're doing everything a citizen should do. And they're up against this horrific legislature that wants to overturn their will. And we've already seen this happen. It's happened in my state of Missouri on ballot initiatives. It's happened in Texas. It's happened in Ohio. It's happened in all sorts of places. So again, there needed to be a plan in place. And what saddens me so much, and I do want everybody to take this to heart, is that if the Democrats either actually lose, which may well happen, especially in the House, or if they don't actually lose, but they don't stand up to Republicans who are baselessly saying that they lost, and I want to stress baselessly, like with no evidence, kind of in the manner that Trump did, I don't expect them to take responsibility, blame their own lack of vigilance, or even acknowledge corrupt laws. Like, the strategy of the Democratic Party at this point, at least at the leadership level, seems to be to blame ordinary people who have had their rights stripped away and to scapegoat them We've already seen this where any kind of criticism of Biden or Merrick Garland or other prominent Democratic figures is labeled, quote unquote, voter suppression. Like that's not voter suppression. Voter suppression is having your vote thrown out by an extremist legislature. Voter suppression is needing forms of ID that are often difficult for some citizens to procure. Voter suppression is having your ballot not arrive to you in the mail or not be able to, get back in time to be counted. Voter suppression is Louis DeJoy staying in there. Voter suppression is poll workers being threatened with death, being intimidated to the point that they resign and are replaced by insurrectionists. All of that is actual voter suppression. Those are structural conditions that disenfranchise the voters. But what I'm watching is a narrative being placed where the blame is going to be on the voters themselves, the voters who have endured a global plague, a tanking economy, unbridled fascism that is not held in check by the DOJ, and just incredible psychological abuse and physical exhaustion for just years on end. So I do not blame the voters. I don't even blame the voters who stay home. I want the voters who are thinking about staying home to go out and vote anyway, because it is a statement of refusal, that you refuse to accept the autocratic maneuvers of the GOP, and that you also refuse to accept a system that wants you to bow down to a corrupt democratic regime. I think the best way of changing this, of getting rid of some of the bad democratic leadership that we have, is by voting, is especially by, voting in primaries, but mostly getting in a position where you're able to get these people out, because they are clearly enablers. They're not there to protect us. Dropping out of the system entirely is not going to solve anything. They won't care about your silent protest. They won't care about your refusal. They're going to see it as acquiescence and they're going to enjoy it. Personally, I don't care at all how these people feel inside. I just know that I'm going to assert in my right both to vote, but also to critique the people for whom I'm voting, and just be wary of this. When they are blaming people abused by a system, they're doing it so that their own failures to protect people and to protect their rights are ignored. And we need to have a big conversation, probably ideally after the midterms, about that failure and about who needs to go across the board, because we don't deserve this. I want you to take that to heart. Absolutely no one deserves what we've dealt with for the last 6 years, for the last 40 years, but particularly since Garland and other people who were supposed to enforce accountability for attacks in our elections have been put in and have done nothing. You deserve to vote in peace. You deserve to have attacks against our country thoroughly and relentlessly investigated. And you deserve a government that gives a shit if our country dies. And, I don't care who you vote for. Nobody deserves mafia state rule. And I think we need to respect ourselves, to have some dignity in this process, to not accept this narrative of abuse if we're truly going to protect our democracy in the years to come.
Very well said. And for more of that, come to our phone bank for John
Yes.
Fetterman this Friday, October 28th, 4 p.m. Eastern. The whole point is there's a massive amount of work that needs to be done. It's not being done. And we're taking, as we have from the very start of this show, a Ukrainian approach of self-reliance. The millennials that drove Euromaidan, the Revolution for Dignity in Ukraine, some of those organizers, the earliest activists that put their bodies on the line in that revolution, went on to found a party called Self-Reliance. And that's why you're seeing Ukrainians who've had a trickling in of the defensive aid they need. They even had the most powerful military in the world, the US government, trying to talk them into getting ready for surrender, getting ready to be an exile government, getting ready for guerrilla warfare. And the Ukrainians were like, I don't need I need an ammo, right? I fucked up that line, but you know what I'm saying? Like the Ukrainians went full self-reliance when Russia's full-blown invasion started in February of this year. They went self-reliance. They hammered the world for the support they needed, but they fought like hell in the face of abject evil. And so we've always, from the start of the show, took a self-reliance stance of like, own your power, don't give your power away, be defiant no matter what. the Russian opposition, like, do not fall into the nihilism that the Russian opposition was in for too long, where they waited too long to realize, oh, wait, we could locally organize, we could run for office, we could organize all of these regional protests. You could read reports that the Russian opposition could not figure all that out until it was too late. They had windows of opportunity, but they were just too stuck in this nihilistic, oh, there's nothing we can do, it's a dictatorship, we're stuck, that's it, let's just go on with our lives, or let's flee abroad and be apolitical. I'm shocked, as I've said before on the show, a friend who got political asylum from Russia, who's now just living his life. I pushed him, like, well, what are you doing against the war? What are you doing for a free Russia? He's like, what's the point? What does it all matter? Don't fall into that nihilism. Sarah and I stand firmly against that trap of nihilism. It's not what this is about. It's about owning your power, showing up for yourself and your community, and demanding better, demanding accountability. Are we angry as hell? Is Merrick Garland a threat to our democracy as much as Russia and the Russian-backed GOP? Yes. We should feel safe in our own country. We should be able to feel like we could vote or volunteer to be a poll watcher safely. Like, is it an outrage that, for instance, Amanda Littman's group Run for Something doesn't have the war chest of the national Democratic committees in Washington, D.C. and all of their bankrolled consultants? Amanda Littman is doing God's work. And all the interviews I've been doing for the Get Out the Vote programming, for all the important conversations that we're bringing to you during this critical time, experts keep bringing up Amanda Littman and Run for Something. She took matters into her own hands. She worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign when the Russians hijacked that and helped bring Trump to power in an illegitimate election, as we've documented many times on the show and as documented in the 400-page Mueller report. Amanda Littman obviously felt the despair and shock that we all did in that moment, but she didn't stay in that despair. She rolled up her sleeves and she got busy, and she's helping people run for office, and she's making a critical difference. And she keeps looking at all of these headlines of all of these war chests of these bigger, more corporatist Democratic players. And she's like, if I had that budget, if I had that money. And it's true. It's like, give her all the money. So if you want to live in a safe democracy, if you want to stand up to organized crime here at home, if you want to stand up to corporate greed, that is no problem backing the Republican insurrectionists and the do-nothing Democrats who are holding back reform that we desperately need and profiting off of it. If you want to fight back against that, set up an automatic donation every month to Amanda Littman's group, Run for Something, whether it's $1, $5, whatever you can afford. There's a lot that we can still do. We resist nihilism at all costs. We know how powerful we are. We know how powerful you are. And it's going to be dark days ahead, no matter who wins on November 8th, because our problems are not going to go away overnight. Even if our best dreams come true with holding on to Congress and expanding our majorities there and making Manchin and Sinema irrelevant, our problems do not go away overnight. This is a long road ahead. We're looking at least a decade of this political instability because James Comey and the rest of American intelligence failed to do their job from stopping a known Russian asset whose family of grifters depended on dirty Russian oligarch money just to stay afloat and just to expand their corrupt empire, right? So we're still living with the repercussions of that, just like our British friends across the pond are living with the same repercussions of that, with that disastrous Brexit vote, so close and tilted with the help of, again, Russian dirty money.
One thing to say about, what's so great about Amanda Littman's approach is that it's the 50-state strategy, which is the strategy that the Democrats have abandoned and that the Republicans have not abandoned. They've created their own autocratic, manipulative version of it. And, I wrote about this in my book, They Knew. I've spoken about this on the show. I am very concerned that the autocracy that is being implemented now, you certainly see this in Supreme Court rulings, is a stepping stone to partition, to a series of violent civil wars, not based along north-south lines as it was in the 19th century, not between two sides, but kind of, a number of battles between states and a lot of secessionist movements, which of course are backed by the most corrupt plutocrats and oligarchs in the world, backed by foreign powers and backed by some of the most disloyal Americans. I'm worried that is the grand plan, possibly carried out more in the next 5 to 10 years than immediately because a depopulated country, broken up into smaller regions, is easier for people to rule. It is easier for them to extract resources as climate change worsens. It's easier for them to control the population. So I want to emphasize very much that we Americans are all in this together. All 50 states, anyone who wants in is in. We have an enemy, and the enemy are these plutocrats and corrupt, evil politicians and oligarchs and mafiosos and others who want to strip this country down and sell it for parts. And I've been saying that for 6 years, and it just gets more true every day. But in order to not fall prey for their tactics, this red state, blue state bullshit has to stop. As I've said many, many times, America is purple. It is purple like a bruise. This idea that there are, quote, two Americas is an illusion. And it's one that makes for an excellent propaganda tactic for the people who want to preserve all the worst aspects of life in America and get rid of the best. And I see people on, multiple sides of these issues falling for it. I see Democrats falling for it. And we have, differences in approaches to various disasters like COVID, for example, that I think give people the stereotype or the generalization in their mind that they need to dehumanize people in other states. And so please, hold on to your own humanity. You do not deserve this. Nobody deserves this. Everybody deserves freedom. Everybody deserves justice. And we are more likely to get it. I mean, if we stick together as a nation and don't fall prey to this sort of propaganda. That's the only way that we will get it. So I hope that folks remember this, because in the months to come, that sort of rhetoric, the secessionist rhetoric, the Civil War rhetoric, the quote national divorce rhetoric, by the way, this is total bullshit. Do not fall for any conservative who tells you that, if your state, your quote unquote blue state, which is not actually a blue state, if it leaves, that they're just going to peacefully leave you to your own devices. These are people who freak out when a liberal arts college, has pronouns, in the classroom. Like, they freak out over the most minute things and target everybody. They're not going to let an entire state go. They're going to attack the people of that state. They're going to try to rearrange the populations. They will invade you, and they will possibly win because they have so much of the military and the police on their side. And I'm sorry if I'm scaring the hell out of you, but I live at the edge of this landscape. Like, I live in St. Louis, Missouri, which means I live in a Democratic city for the most part, in a Republican hostage state that is full of, there are a number of militias and extremist organizations here, right-wing extremists. So, that is real. And I think it's a likely place for actual violence to break out. But, that's true. There are other versions of this all over the country, and real people will get hurt. Real people are so overwhelmed with worry about all the things we've already endured that I'm not sure they're even able to process that this is very likely the plan. So please just, stand up for each other, extend some grace to each other. I see folks lashing out at each other all the time. And what I really see is a nation in pain, a nation full of grief that has not collectively grieved. The motto has always been to move on, move on from COVID, move on from January 6th, move on from decades of entrenched corruption, move on from poverty. And, we here at Gaslit Nation are refusing to move on. And we want you to join us in this refusal. And there are a lot of ways to express that. But just know, we are not buckling down, and we are not abandoning the United States of America. We're not going to, leave anybody by the wayside, no matter, where you live or who you are. We just refuse. That's being a good citizen. That's being a good American, I think, is refusing to bow down to a culture of abandonment and corruption.
Absolutely. And the way back to that, the way to being the United States of America, is the 50-state strategy. And within the 50-state strategy, in every district strategy. So as we move forward from this election, one of the most important areas that we have to rebuild is rural America, building progressive infrastructure in rural America. We have today on the show guests that have done that. that ran successfully in a rural district in Maine that was very Republican, and they were able to flip it Democrat and represent it for the state of Maine. And they share how they did it and how what they did can be replicated across the board, because we are one America. We are the United States of America. We're all in this time of mass trauma together. And so we need to learn to have conversations that cut through the noise of all that. So this discussion you're going to hear explains all of that beautifully. And there's a book as part of this that they wrote to share their lessons. And so this has to be the larger conversation moving forward. And I want to just end this episode before we move on to our interview. I want to do an urgent call to New York. Don't be complacent, New York. The polling is very scary for where we live here in our local races, including the race for governor. The polls are tightening there. You have a loyal Trumpist bootlicker, Lee Zeldin, who was an insurrectionist, who voted against certifying the election results on January 6th. He's a Trump loyalist through and through. And not only that, Lee Zeldin is backed by the NRA. So he's going, if he becomes governor, which could happen because the polls are tightening, if he becomes governor, he is going to push back a lot of these gun safety laws that Governor Hochul has been pushing through, even against the Supreme Court, trying to remove guns off of our street and keep us safe, right? Mass shootings happen every day in America. It is an epidemic. It is terrifying. No country on earth should live with this daily terrorism, but we uniquely as Americans do. And I believe that this is part of not just the blood money greed of the gun lobby. I believe there's something deeper here. It's all connected. When you look at the Republicans, including Republican women like Lauren Boebert saying, women must submit. Women are the lesser vessel. And this is what she's running on, because this is the Republican Party Christo-fascist thinking that they're deeply proud of women being sent back into the home. And I believe that as part of allowing all of these mass shootings, including at schools, what do you think that's doing? That's forcing women back into the home to basically homeschool their kids. Look at the homeschool movement that these candidates, these Republicans are also pushing. Even a guy like that Gen Z fascist Crawford, what was his name? Madison. He was pushing homeschooling. You know what I mean? He's like in frat parties, getting caught in all these weird parties, and he's like pushing homeschooling. It's like because it's part of a larger movement. When Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale, everything that she used for that novel for inspiration came from real life. And a lot of it came from our staunch conservatives right here at home. And her big question in writing that book was, how do you get women back into the home? How do you force them to stay in the home and be limited to just being wives and mothers? How do you do that? And I think this is part of that movement, is forcing women to submit by terrorizing your kids at school. And then what's the next logical conclusion of that? Oh, there's all these mass shootings at schools. They're not stopping. No one's stopping them. So I'm going to take my kid out of school. I'm going to give up my career and I'm going to homeschool them for 18 years or so. Like, think about it. Like, this is a deeper crisis that we're up against. So Lee Zeldin stands for all that. It's just a very scary time. Hochul's been a great governor. She's passed innovative policy for green energy, investing massively into green industry, creating quality green jobs. She is going to make, as she is making New York a leader in the whole climate revolution that we desperately need in order to face off with the big bang that's coming when climate change just gets worse and worse. So it's Hochul who's going to lead us into the future. We desperately need her. So please, if you are a New Yorker, make sure you have a plan to vote. Do not sit this one out. Make sure you get 5 friends and neighbors to vote with you. Make sure, call people, just call people, catch up with them, check in on them, get people to the polls. We cannot sleep on this. We cannot be complacent. Another troubling sign is that Sean Patrick Maloney, who is the head of the DCCC, which is the Democrats' arm for overseeing the House races, he in New York State might lose his House race, okay, to a Republican. So this is how scary things are in New York State. It's not a safe blue state. We had a ballot measure in 2021, which would have expanded voting rights in New York State, which would have given Democrats an edge in redistricting. And the Democratic Party was complacent and did nothing in ensuring that this ballot measure would pass. And so what happened? Republicans ensured that it wouldn't. They made the investment. They beat the pavement. They went knocking on doors. They did launch events against this ballot initiative while Democrats in the state slept. So our biggest enemy here in big blue New York State is Democratic complacency. All right. So everyone needs to wake up, get to the polls, get your friends and neighbors to the polls, because with everything that we're up against here in New York, we cannot survive a Lee Zeldin administration. He'll let Trump back in. He'll let the Trump family back in. This will be a safe place for the Trumps again. And we all know how that goes. So please fight like hell. Protect abortion rights here at home. Stand up to the NRA. Protect green energy and climate policy. Vote for Kathy Hochul. We need her as our governor. Now, without further ado, here is our interview on how to build progressive infrastructure to build relationships with rural communities to help protect our democracy going forward. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special episode of Gaslit Nation. I am your co-host, Andrea Chalupa, talking with you today about a very important issue that will define our political landscape for the years to come, and that is how to reach the all-important rural voter. What are rural voters? What do they want? How do we get through to them? And so on. And I'm, of course, saying all this from Brooklyn, New York. You know, I'm in the bubble, as they say. I'm in the progressive bubble. So to help walk us through this issue, we have on the show Senator Chloe Maxman. Senator Maxman grew up on her family's farm in Maine and has been a community organizer for more than 16 years. She's worked on numerous political campaigns and initiatives focusing on combating climate change and ensuring a resilient Maine. In her undergrad at Harvard, she co-founded Divest Harvard, a group of 10 participants, which soon grew to 70,000, focused on getting the university to divest from fossil fuels. Shortly thereafter, in 2018, Chloe became the first Democrat to ever win a House seat in Maine's District 88. Wow, the oldest district and the oldest state in the country. And as House Representative and now Senator, Chloe's work is focused on effective, bipartisan, community-based leadership for Maine. And with her is Canyon Woodward, a political strategist, climate activist, and author born and raised in Southern Appalachia and the North Cascades. He earned an honors degree in social studies from Harvard. And in 2018, he set out on a journey with Chloe to explore what might be done to rebuild rural politics. And they are together the authors of Dirt Road Revival, an important book giving a deep dive on rural voters today and how to reach them. All right, so Chloe and Canyon, thank you so much for being here. Could you walk us through what is the rural voter? Why does it feel like Democrats have fallen short in reaching them? And what are the most important things to know about how to reach rural voters today?
Thanks a ton for having us. We're stoked to be here talking about this. It's such an important issue. I think not enough folks realize the outsized influence that the rural vote has on our elections, from the local and state level all the way up to the federal level. The rural vote really has an outsized influence on our elections. And you look at that in states like my home state of North Carolina, where we can elect a Democratic governor statewide like we have, but then we end up with Republican majorities and super majorities in the state legislature, partially because of gerrymandering, but overwhelmingly because we are, as a party, just running up the score in the most populous areas and, winning by huge margins in districts in the cities and sometimes in the suburbs, and really neglecting organizing and going out into the rural areas and telling a story that resonates with rural voters and investing and organizing there. And that's really shooting us in the foot, because we, as Chloe's runs have shown, we can win in rural America, but we have to invest the resources.
Yeah, I think everything that Canyon said was perfect and spot on. And I think it's something that, we kind of understood intellectually as we were going into our campaigns, and part of why we went into our campaigns trying to do things differently because we understood that rural America has a lot of power, and it's been tilting to the right. From 2009 to 2019, rural America went from basically no partisan lean to voting 16 points Republican, which is just a huge shift in a short amount of time. But it really hit home for us when we were out canvassing. We created our own universe of folks to go talk to kind of outside of the party structure. And every day we were talking to people who had never been contacted by a Democratic candidate or canvasser in their entire voting history. And there were also so many people who had never been contacted since 2008 when Obama was running for president. And it really just hit home how there's so many folks that, as Democrats, we just haven't talked to. And actually, there's a lot of common ground there. There's a lot of space to build relationships and respect and to try and bridge some of these huge divides that are tearing the country apart.
Is it a simple matter of lack of funds? Is it because Republicans, thanks to Citizens United, have so much more dark money? Their campaign war chests can allow them to go out there and do the work to reach rural voters? What advantage do the Republicans have, and what has sort of been holding back the Democrats from making those investments in rural voters?
There's a lot of things. I think over the past decade, a lot of Democratic leaders have stopped trying to persuade folks who we see as disagreeing with us and have counted instead on demographic shifts to carry the party to victory. If only we can just squeeze enough votes out of our base in the most populous areas. And I think the choice to prioritize turnout in Democratic strongholds over persuasion of moderate and especially rural voters has cost us a lot. In the party, there's just an ingrained sense that it's not worth the resources to go out and go door to door in rural America. The chair of the DNC in 2018 said, "You can't knock doors in rural America," which is bonkers to me.
Wait, which chair was this? Which chair?
That was Tom Perez.
Wow.
And, he walked it back as he should, but I think that was really revealing of the party mindset, and that has cost us so much over the past decade. And that was the heart of our campaigns in 2018 and 2020 in the most rural county and most rural state in the country. Chloe overcame a 16-point Republican advantage by building a grassroots campaign to go door to door. That's how we reach people.
That's extraordinary. So, Chloe, what did you find? What are some of your three top points of advice for how to connect with people? And this is extremely important advice for us now as we're making phone calls and knocking on doors to get out the vote. And we have listeners at Gaslit Nation who are considering running for office. They've run for office because we've begged them to on this show. So what are some of the big three takeaways that you have from your experiences from how to connect with voters, how to approach a stranger and connect with them to make your cause known and help sort of share in this struggle together? How do you sort of humanize people when it can be really scary to approach a stranger?
Yeah, it definitely is really scary, especially when you might see a Trump sign on the lawn or, when there's views that really challenge your own or, and for so many of us make us feel unsafe. So it's definitely very complicated territory. But for the most part, what we found was that really centering, listening, and respect was so huge. When you're talking with folks who have different political views than you do, you don't walk up to their home where they're probably making dinner for their family and say, "Hey, I'm Chloe, we're strangers, let's argue about abortion." You want to, what we did was we said, "Hi, I'm Chloe, I'm running for state senate. I'm just stopping by to see what's on your mind and hear what you're thinking," and having just really open-ended conversations, which are actually how we begin to form relationships. We tend to, like you said, dehumanize politics. And I think what Kanan and I have tried to do is make it more human and really just say, how do we build a relationship with someone that we disagree with? What does that look like in our everyday lives? And then translate that to politics. And I think once you are listening and having the ability to kind of respect what you hear, I think it's about searching for that common ground. And I was surprised in myself, as someone who identifies as very strongly progressive, that I did find a lot of common ground with people, even if it was as simple as, wow, we really love our community, or wow, we need more access to healthcare in rural America, or wow, it would be great if there were better transportation options for seniors in rural America. There are things that we can really connect on when we're centering our relationships around values of respect. And I think the third thing is that none of this can happen alone. It can't happen just by one candidate. It can't happen with just one campaign staff. It really takes a movement. We were so blessed and honored to have so many volunteers join our campaign in whatever way they felt was best for them. And that sense that the campaign wasn't just about getting one person elected, but it was really about our community and fighting for the better side of our community, not letting these dark, divisive forces tear us down. None of it can be done alone.
So I want to just ask, what is the psychology of the rural voter? I'm bringing this up because someone very smart, who I consider to be media literate, was taken in by a thread. I believe he found it on Reddit, saying that the big difference between urban voters and rural voters is that urban voters tend to like people more because they're living surrounded by people in urban settings. They see government more active in their lives because they have more dependence on government, like public transportation. And rural voters don't see government as much in their lives. And I'm just raising this to share, this is a thread out there on the internet that somebody made with these points. I don't even know if they're true or not, but other people who consider themselves very sophisticated thinkers are repeating them at these points. And so I wanted to raise this to you. How do we think of the urban versus rural voter divide? Why is it that urban voters tend to be liberal, progressive, openly so, and rural ones tend to be conservative? What do you think it comes down to?
There's so much. I think that there's a very strong history about why progressive values have centered in the cities that goes all the way back to industrialization and folks leaving rural areas to move to the cities, and the formation of unions and labor rights and academic institutions really being concentrated in urban areas. There's a whole long history that we touch on in the book that has contributed to this pattern. And I think there's been reinforcing elements too, especially with the Democrats and a lot of Democratic leaders coming from more urban spaces. And a lot of those leaders are absolutely incredible. I admire AOC. She's one of the people that I look up to, and she's from a city, but I think that rural culture is just different, and every rural state is different. And the way that these communities talk and interact, and the way that community feels, it's just different, as it should be. We all deserve our own unique identities. And I think there's been kind of a lack of flexibility and interest in really kind of reaching out to rural folks and centering that experience as well. And it's been to the detriment of our country and our national politics.
All of that's spot on. I think the only thing I'd add is economically in the Obama years, post as we recovered from the Great Recession, rural America lagged behind on almost every economic measure. So I think there was a sense of resentment there from the government propping up Wall Street and this recovery not really including rural America. And then I think there's also been a really, really destructive narrative that has emerged in the past decade or so of just this idea that rural voters are ignorant and voting against their own self-interest because they're so ignorant. And it's just such a condescending, counterproductive narrative that really demonstrates how out of touch a lot of the establishment is with rural people. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to turn around.
There was a article in the New York Post this summer about one of their writers who had come to Maine to vacation, and this writer wrote this piece about how Maine is so backwoods and there's no public transportation and no one has any sense of style, and the writer was so grateful to get back to civilization in the city. And I remember reading the article and being like, oh, this is an Onion type article about these themes, about how progressives look at rural America. This is so funny and spot on. But it turned out that the article was very serious, and it was that classic narrative about how rural states and rural spaces just don't live up to the civilized qualities of the city. And it made so many Mainers, so many of my friends, very resentful of that city perspective. And I just always felt like that was a good little anecdote of how these narratives just kind of get repeated in small ways and end up having a really big impact.
And the New York Post is conservative.
Yeah.
so that's, I guess they're basically telling on themselves, the Republican elite, and how they really see the people that vote for them. From a progressive perspective, I think a lot of frustrated progressives feel that they're also dealing, when it comes to rural voters, that they tend to be conservative. They tend to, and being conservative, they tend to get their news from Fox News. And there's this feeling that it's like a low information voter. That's one thing I've heard to describe rural voters, as low information voters. Is that what's going on as well? Is that playing into this?
Yeah, I mean, right-wing news, Fox News and conservative talk radio, as well as Facebook and really insidious, destructive disinformation campaigns have been a huge part of this story. There's no doubt about that. And at the same time, I think that we have to take responsibility for our own part that we've played in that, of not investing as progressives, as Democrats, not investing in campaigns in rural areas. We have not been in those communities, showing up and combating those narratives and building relationships of trust with those folks. Democratic leaders have been pretty much nowhere to be seen in rural America. And, there's just been this huge void that's opened up, that's been filled with right-wing extremism, totally uncontested by Democrats.
Wow. Okay. Has this led to rural voters increasing their loyalty to Republicans and their hostility towards Democrats? Is it very foregone at this point? Is it going to take years and years of investment to pull it back?
Well, I mean, I think the good news is that, this isn't a story that goes back as far as we might think. Like Chloe mentioned earlier, as recently as 2009, the partisan lean was dead even in rural America. So it's not a completely lost cause. I think I find so much hope in Chloe being able to win in a district that had a 16-point Republican advantage, but it's not going to be won through TV ad buys and Facebook ads. It's going to take the party being willing to really, really seriously take several chapters out of the Bernie book, the AOC book, the Stacey Abrams book, and go back to the basics of face-to-face conversations, which are super time-consuming, super resource-intensive, but are what really are necessary to move the needle in rural America.
And when we talk about rural voters, we don't just mean white, because there's a lot of non-white people that live in a lot of rural areas as well. Could you talk a little bit about that, how it's not just a big white monolith? It's actually can be quite diverse in rural areas across America, increasingly so.
Totally. I mean, Maine is overwhelmingly white, but then you have like the rural organizing that Stacey Abrams has done in Georgia to register Black voters, rural voters in particular, so key to flipping those U.S. Senate seats. Similar in our ability to win Arizona in 2020. So much of that was tremendous organizing in Navajo Nation and turning out the rural indigenous vote. About a fifth or a quarter of rural America is people of color.
If you two were elected as co-leaders of the Democratic National Committee, could that be a possibility? And if so, what would be sort of your main focus in creating the kind of central Democratic organizing force that could help Democrats increase their votes in all of these districts, which would give us a greater margin, and especially in a lot of these really close states, and especially given Republican gerrymandering?
I think for us, it's all about grassroots organizing and really viewing campaigns as an opportunity to dig deep into a community and have the tough conversations that create relationships strong enough to withstand an election season. And, we are by far not the only people doing this work. There are incredible organizers and candidates on the ground who have been pounding the dirt roads for so long and really hold an important ground in rural America. And it's so important that instead of all of the resources disproportionately going to urban spaces, that there is ample support for rural candidates in tricky districts, who need more resources because it takes longer to knock doors. You need more volunteers to do all of the work. I think, one of the blessings that we had in our race as well was a very strong Democratic county committee. The Lincoln County Democrats are doing incredible work, really organizing and holding on to a pretty strong Democratic base in a rural, conservative purple county. And that kind of infrastructure is so important when we're talking about what it looks like for someone to win in rural America, because the candidate and the campaign needs to go have those difficult conversations with Republicans and independents. And so we need that strong county backbone infrastructure to be able to really make sure that Democrats don't lose faith that we're getting out to vote. And I think the last thing is that running for office is not always accessible to everybody. There's a reason why it's older, rich white folks in office, because you don't get paid to run for office. And a lot of state legislatures, you barely get paid to be in office. And, it's something we talk about in the book, is just how we're young, we don't have any kids, our work is flexible, we could manage it. But if we want a truly representative democracy, we need to ensure that folks from all backgrounds have the resources and capacity to run for office, whether that's adjusting legislative pay or making sure that candidates got all the resources and volunteer support that they need, so that they can run and really represent their community. We need to focus on having a more representative elected body. And one of the things that gives me hope is swiping through Run for Something's Instagram account. They're an awesome organization that train and recruit young progressives to run for office. And oh my gosh, they just have so many amazing people running for office at all levels, all across the country. And that makes me really hopeful.
That's wonderful. And how do you feel Jamie Harrison is doing as the DNC chair? He ran for that position as bringing back the dirt road politics, as he called it, from when he was running for Senate in South Carolina, about people seeing that in rural America, in rural South Carolina, they weren't seeing their roads being taken care of by government. So why should they care about government? So that Jamie Harrison really cited that, bringing back the connection, showing rural America that government works, as a reason why he wanted to run the DNC. Have you seen Jamie Harrison live up to those promises? Do you see him bringing back any element of reaching those voters?
Yes, he's definitely demonstrated a commitment to that. That is needed. I think it's a huge ship to turn, the DNC and the party writ large. I think still, with a little bit more focus on the rural, it's still a little bit too focused on, what can we do with consultants and big media buys, those strategies, as opposed to let's really, really make a huge investment in hiring grassroots organizers in these communities on the grounds to do the more grassroots movement work that we need to build over the long term. It's not a matter of an election cycle or a couple of election cycles. It's about building really long-term rural infrastructure over, the course of 5 years, 10 years, that we really need to shift a lot of these districts.
It's about investing in the ground on organizers who are part of their community, represent their community, and ensuring that these are leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So nothing replaces community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the face-to-face conversations and those authentic interactions, so much more so in this digital age. those conversations are what move the voters in the middle that we can reach.
Thank you both so much for your time on the show. You're always welcome back. And we appreciate so much the work you're doing. So please stay in touch with us and come back anytime you're working on something that you think could help energize our listeners and move people to action, because it's going to be an all hands on deck time in America for many years to come.
Yeah, enjoyed this conversation so much. If folks want to get more involved with this, dirtroadorganizing.org is our organization, and we'd love to be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher.
Pakistan has been decimated by record floods, and people need help. To help victims of the floods, donate to Pakistan Emergency Flood Aid at www.launchgood.com/campaign/Pakistan_emergency_flood_aid. Climate and economic crises are everywhere, so continue supporting your local food bank as well.
We encourage you to help support Ukraine by donating to Rozum for Ukraine at rozumforukraine.org. We also encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going.
Our production manager is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle.
Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Bissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle.
Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish.
Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher: Jess Sauer,
Chick Quinn,
Lily Wachowski,
Sean Rubin,
Todd Pearlstein,
Kenny Main,
John Schoenthaler,
Ellen McGirt,
Joel Farron,
Larry Gasson,
Erica Moore,
Karen A. Deal,
Nico Phillips,
Brian E. Castor,
Tatiana Birch,
Karen Heisler,
Ann Bertino,
Chris Bravo,
T.R. Dunstan,
John Millett,
David East,
Stu,
Ida,
Ben Wheaton,
Joseph Mara Jr.,
Rich Holcomb,
Thomas Scheibe,
Kelsey Malsom,
Julie Matthews,
Meganopolis,
Barbara Kittredge,
Matthew Womack,
Silas Frank,
Sean Berg,
Kristen Custer,
Tracy Ash,
Kai Gillis,
Sharon Hatrick,
Ed Snowden's Russian passport,
William Barry Reeves,
Richard Smith,
Emmy,
Kevin Gannon,
Mike Christensen,
Sandra Collins,
Katie Masuris,
John Laughlin,
James D. Leonard,
Leo Chalupa,
Carol Golstad,
Michael Woldridge,
Jason Benke,
Marcus J. Trent,
Joe Darcy,
Ann Marshall,
Jeremy Lewis,
Joel Newman,
Trigvi,
D.L. Singfield,
Matt Perez,
Nicole Spear,
Brian Tajudin,
Maureen Murphy,
Abby Road,
Jans Alstrup Rasmussen,
Victoria Olson,
Z.W.,
Lisa LaFlame,
Kathy Kavanaugh,
Sarah Gray,
Mike Tripico,
Diana Gallagher,
Jennifer Ann Luter,
John Ripley,
Ethan Mann,
David Porter,
Kate Cotton,
Leah Campbell,
Lynn Schneider,
Jared Lombardo,
Karen Humphreys,
and Marshall.
and Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
Thank you.